Hi folks, are you feeling exhausted and perhaps a little bit cynical? Well, today I'm going to decided to share with you a little bit of a personal story. I'm taking a little bit of a risk doing this today, but I think it's worth it because it's an important subject. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the experience of burnout is like. From my personal experience of having had it happen to me several times throughout my life. So hi again, everybody, and welcome back to Peace Unplugged. I've thought long and hard about doing this episode, and to be honest with you, it's just a little bit uncomfortable, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's something I thought about recording for quite a few months. I just haven't really quite got round to it. But I've decided to do this because if it can help at least one person out there who's had similar symptoms, then that makes it worthwhile doing. So we're talking about burnout, particularly work burnout or workplace burnout. That's not just the kind of like, I'm a bit tired, I need a bit of a holiday. It's much deeper than that. It's that time when it can be completely soul crushing and a time when it's actually very difficult, almost impossible to get out of bed. It's that time when the mind is full of questioning everything. I'm not just sharing this from a point of view of from having done some research. This is a very personal issue from someone who's lived through it on several occasions. So I'm going to talk to you about the first time this happened. And it was during my early 30s. Now, I'd gone through a few low-paid jobs, having left school without any real proper qualifications. I worked as a shipping agent in Ramsgate for a few years until redundancy when the changes of VAT during the EU happened. So in my early 30s, I just decided I need to get a grip and really make a proper attempt at some kind of career. To that end, I found myself a job in the motor trade as an administrator. At the time, I thought, right, it's time to start climbing the ladder. And I thought success meant saying yes to everything. I was attempting to make myself indispensable. I wanted to be the person that could handle it all. So this job was an 8 till 6, Monday to Friday, with every other Saturday working. And yes, of course, it was stressful with those long hours, but I wore that stress like a kind of a badge of honour. And quite frankly, I was good at what I did. And I managed to stay one step ahead of my boss all the time. He'd asked me to do things which I'd already got ahead of him and done before he asked me. So I did earn myself quite a good reputation. But as time went by, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic at first. Because of the long hours and the amount of work that I'd taken on, I started to have poor sleep. I found it difficult to switch off at night time. I was also working hard, playing hard, spending a lot of my leisure time out playing music and also driving people around, giving people lifts to band and so on, and getting home well past midnight, only to be up at like 6:30 in the morning. Gradually, my energy started to decrease. Work began to feel like pushing a boulder uphill. I also felt like I was firefighting all the time. Nothing could ever get completed on time, or at least it felt like that, which inevitably resulted in me working extra hours on top of the hours that I was contracted to do. There'll be some days I'd still be in the workplace at 7, 8 o'clock in the evening, and I'd get up and start work. Rather than starting work at 8 o'clock, I'd be getting into the office at 7 o'clock, 6 o'clock. On one occasion, I couldn't sleep at night, and my wife wondered what I was doing because I was in the shower at 3:30 in the morning. She said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm going to work." I said, "Because I can't get all these thoughts of work out of my head." I thought if I go into work and just get it done, it'll at least take it away from me. My body started rebelling against me with all the aches and pains, and I became really cynical. I started snapping at people, snapping at my family, snapping at work colleagues. I was getting stomach issues, and I developed this kind of anxiety which never seemed to go away. People telling me to slow down, but I was terrified of stopping. I was frightened if I stopped, I'd never get started again. I just kept on pushing through. I thought that if I just worked harder and got myself better organised, I'd just power through it. Then came the point where I started to make mistakes, errors that I never used to make before that, and some of those errors became reasonably serious. Or at least it felt like that to me. Eventually, they ended up in a breakdown. I took some time off and eventually ended in another redundancy. I was burnt out and I was angry. I felt like I'd wasted 5 years, but I'd still got the responsibilities of family and paying a mortgage. So I kind of brushed myself down and found myself another job. And this involved commuting. This new kind of adventure felt like a new boost of energy. But I hadn't yet to realise and recognise that the damage had already been done. I still hadn't recovered from that first burnout. The place I started working was a startup company. And it was a lot of fun to start with. But before long, I noticed how that organisation was starting to fail. And I feared losing my job again. That's when I took the step to jump into something which was completely wrong for me at the time. I had a go at doing some multi-level marketing, and I made some kind of success with it at the beginning. I decided to jack in my job and go full-time on this multi-level marketing adventure. On reflection, it's something I should have avoided because of my burnout issues. I threw myself into this multi-level marketing issue, rushing around, working all hours. It went reasonably well to start with, and then the bubble burst. I got myself into a lot of debt, and again, I tried to battle through it, but I just couldn't. And then came the morning when I just couldn't get out of bed. I felt sick. I could barely move. I couldn't answer any email. I couldn't answer any emails, and I couldn't pretend anymore. I'd hit the wall hard. It was a very dark place to be at that time. That second burnout taught me something really crucial, although it would take me years to really fully understand it. See, burnout is not a scheduling problem, and it's not about working too many hours, though that does come into it. It was fundamentally a mismatch between what I wanted to achieve and what my values were, which were kind of hidden to me at the time. During this second burnout, I felt myself to be useless. I did feel a complete failure. But at the same time, I needed to carry on because I still got the mortgage to pay and I still got the family to look after. So I took a couple of months off and then eventually found yet another job in London. I conned myself that I'd fixed myself. The thing was, I wasn't fixed at all. I was actually still in a state of deep depression. Now, this latest job I got in London was one I absolutely despised. And again, I felt trapped. It's then a crucial chapter. A crucial change in my life occurred, and it's something I shall remember to the end of my days. One particular evening, coming home on the train, I was a bit late home from work. I was feeling down and depressed. Didn't have any money on me. I fancied going for a beer. I didn't have any money to go and spend on that. I couldn't even get a can of beer from the off license. And this young guy, dishevelled looking, got on the train. He was wearing a yellow T-shirt and blue shorts, and those clothes were quite dirty. And he was wandering around to other passengers on the train, telling some story about how he'd lost his money or he needed to get back to go and visit his grandparent and didn't have the money for the train fare, and could anybody help him out? And I watched him go up to several people, and I thought to myself, please don't come anywhere near me because I really don't want to be dealing with that sort of thing. I've got too many of my own problems going on. But of course, inevitably, he did approach me. He sat down beside me, told me his story. I simply said to him, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I haven't got any money. If I've had a spare beer, like I sometimes do coming home on the train from work, I'd have given you one of those. But I said, I've got nothing I can give you. I really can't help you. It was at that point, this guy broke down and sobbed uncontrollably in front of me. And I remember he said to me, what's the matter with everybody these days? And I really felt for him. We struck up a bit of a conversation, which mainly involved me listening to him telling me about his life, about how he'd been in the army and got medically discharged. Every now and then he disappeared because the train guard was coming through and he didn't want to get caught. He didn't want to get thrown off the train. But he kept coming back to me on that journey, sitting down, talking again. Every now and then he'd go and wander off and try and beg off someone else. They'd send him away and he'd shout and swear at them. But to say again, he just kept on coming back to me until it came from the time for me to get off the train. Never saw the guy again in my life, but it had a real impression upon me because I suddenly realised that I'd got a skill I'd never noticed before, and that was the ability to sit and listen to somebody with empathy and make a difference. See, because that lad shook my hand when I left the train and thanked me for talking to him and listening to him. So at that point, I got an understanding to what my calling was. And that resulted in me, shortly after that time, finding another job working in a young person's hostel for young men. Sounds like a great thing to do, doesn't it? to suddenly change direction and find what I was meant to do all along. It wasn't quite like that. That then presented another whole load of challenges. I needed to do work on myself, although I didn't realise it at the time. It was a steep learning curve, and it involved some really uncomfortable revelations along the way. Initially doing that job, I felt calm and confident. But again, it didn't last. So there I was again, feeling exhausted and cynical and empty. I thought to myself, how can this be happening again? I thought I was doing everything right. This time the confusion made it worse. How could I feel like a failure again? I really started to wonder what's wrong with me. And for the most part, I kept this a secret, certainly from my family. The truth is that I couldn't see that I was treating the symptoms whilst ignoring the disease. My boundaries were kind of surface level. I still said yes to things when really and truly I meant no. And that's because I couldn't tolerate disappointing people. I still pushed through the warning signs because I got very rigid ideas about what commitment and dedication looked like. This burnout was darker because it came with a lot of personal shame. I should have known better, I found myself saying. I should have been stronger. But it was also the burnout that pushed me towards real change, though I didn't know it yet. Because you see, the thing is, when you hit rock bottom more than once, you start to wonder whether you're digging your own hole. So inevitably, there was a further job change. I started working with people suffering with problematic substance use. That's drugs and alcohol. And within a few weeks, that led me into some serious therapy. It's something I'd dabbled with before, but not really taken that seriously. I started that therapy not because I wanted to, but because I was absolutely desperate. I felt I'd lost who I was. I went into that therapy quite defensive. My thoughts were therapy was for people with real problems, not for someone like me who just couldn't handle his work-life balance properly. Those first sessions were really challenging. But fortunately, I realised that I've found a therapist who really seemed to understand me. She listened to me. And I mean, she really listened to me. She listened without judgment. And then she gently helped me to address my faulty thinking. And she kept pushing in that gentle way. She asked me to examine thoughts I'd never considered before, and she got me to look at patterns I'd never looked at before. The tension was this. I had to confront those rigid thinking rules that I put for myself, those rules I built my adult life around that were actually destroying me. And I had to look at the fact that if those rules were wrong, then who am I? What did I believe? And how was I supposed to operate? Here's what therapy taught me that I wish I'd known at the beginning. Burnout isn't just about doing too much. It's about how you think about what you're doing. And it's about the stories that you tell yourself. Those stories about productivity, self-worth, finding some rest, and about what success means. Breaking out of burnout meant breaking out of those rigid thought patterns that I had. It meant getting comfortable with the concept of uncertainty. It meant dealing with the grey areas that I'd spent my life trying to eliminate. Now, let me get specific about those rigid thought patterns that cause the burnout. They may be familiar to you. There's that all or nothing thinking. Either I've got to give 110% or I must just be lazy. There's the catastrophizing. If I don't finish this project perfectly, everything else will fall apart. There's the mind reading, the thought that people will think that I'm incompetent, especially if I asked for help. Now, I knew the answers to this intellectually, but I didn't understand them emotionally. See, those patterns felt protective. They felt like they were keeping me safe, and I believed that they were helping me to be successful. But they were actually traps. Every rigid rule I created was just another way to fail. It was another source of stress, and it was another reason I couldn't rest. My therapist would challenge these thoughts. She said to me, "Is that true? Is it true that if you don't respond to that email that you'll lose your job?" And I'd say, "Well, no, but..." And she'd say, "But what?" And that was the question that haunted me. What was I actually afraid of? Under all the productivity and all the perfectionism, there was fear. That's fear of being seen as inadequate. Actually, the fear of being ordinary. The fear of being rejected if I wasn't performing in an exceptional way. Fully recognizing these patterns didn't disappear overnight, but it did give me some space. It gave me some space to question whether my rules were true or not, some space to experiment with breaking some of those rules just to see what would happen. And there was nothing catastrophic, not in real terms. Let's face it, the world still kept turning round. I still had people that respected me, I still got friends, I'd still got family, work still got done. Mind you, it wasn't always as straightforward as that. I was yet to accept some of my personality traits. And those personality traits I'm now more aware of today, and I've worked out ways of managing them. This was the beginning of what I describe as cautious open-mindedness. That's not abandoning all structural discipline. I'm definitely not advocating for that. But it is, to a certain extent, loosening the grip, asking myself, what if there's another way? So cautious open-mindedness became my new goal. That's not just reckless optimism or throwing all my values out the window, but it was a willingness to question my assumptions, a willingness to try things differently, and also to ultimately tolerate not knowing the answer. Now, this was harder than it sounds. You see, when you've built your entire life around rigid rules, very likely learned in childhood, then any flexibility feels like chaos. There were days when I wanted to retreat back to my old patterns of certainty, even though they'd nearly destroyed me. Because the point is, you see, they felt familiar. I needed to perform small acts of rebellion against my own thought patterns, against my own rigid thoughts. This meant making sure I left work at 5 p.m, even when the project wasn't perfect. The saying no to opportunities that frankly looked good on paper, but in reality would just drain me. One of the toughest ones was standing up for myself when I got bullied, which happened frequently. Concept of resting without earning it through productivity. Each time I tried this, it felt dangerous, but I still survived. Here's what I discovered. Open-mindedness is not about accepting everything. It's about examining beliefs and being willing to update them, especially when the evidence of what I had done was not serving me. It's about realizing that the way we do things is not the only way, and not even necessarily the best way. This shift changed my relationship with work and with rest, and ultimately with myself. Now, I'm not going to tell you that I never get stressed. I still get overwhelmed. If I told you I wasn't, I'd simply be lying to you. But so far, I haven't burned out again. Probably the best decision I made was to take some early retirement and focus on some projects that really felt more meaning to me. And what I've noticed is that when I feel the early stages of a possible burnout, I don't ignore them. I stop pushing through. I'll just pause. I'll reflect. I'll adjust. And I'll choose to be kind to myself. So what are the practical takeaways from all of this? I know that personal stories can be really compelling, but you're probably wondering, okay, but what does someone in this position actually do? First of all, understand that if you keep burning out, it's not because you're weak. It's not because you don't have the skills. It's because there's a deeper pattern at work. And those surface level solutions, like for instance, better time management, having a fancy planner, practicing mindfulness, even though I find it very, very useful. It doesn't, and those things in themselves don't address the deeper issue. We need to look at some of our core beliefs. What do we believe about taking a rest? What do we believe about productivity? What do we believe about our self-worth? And are those beliefs serving us? Ultimately, or can they be significantly destroying? And it requires a real honesty that's uncomfortable. It's also admitting that actually, I don't yet have it all figured out. It is a continuous journey. So here's what worked for me. I went and found myself some help with therapy, and that's not a weakness. It's getting a guide to work through territory that you can't do alone. Next is the ability to question perhaps everything. When we find ourselves thinking in absolutes, the I must, or I have to, or I should, these things I know I learned in childhood. I stop and ask, is that actually true? What would happen if I didn't? Point 3. Practice some small acts of flexibility. We don't have to overhaul our whole life overnight, but just experiment a little. Perhaps leave work early for once. Say no to something. Take some rest without having to think that you've got to earn it. Just see what happens. It's about listening to our body. Number 4, notice if you start catastrophizing. Let's face it, our brains will predict disaster. The kind of, if I don't do this, and so-and-so and so-and-so will happen. And usually the disaster doesn't happen. We could collect evidence that our worst fears are quite often overblown. So number 5 for me is redefine success. Success for me used to mean constant achievements. Now it means more about sustainability. Can I do this work? Can I live this life in a way that can sustain me for years to come? If not, something seriously needs to change. Now, I want to be really honest with you. I don't consider myself cured. not by any means. There is no finish line. The work is ongoing. And again, I've got to say, there's some days I find myself slipping back into old patterns, some of that rigid thinking, perfectionism, the fear-driven productivity. But I'm much more aware of it now, and I feel more confident to challenge those poor thinking patterns. And sometimes this work can be discouraging. After all the work, the therapy, after all the insights, I still have to choose a different way from time to time. You see, because that default setting is still there, and it's waiting to take over when I feel stressed and scared. The shift is that I now notice it. I can see it happening. I've got some new tools and I've got a new perspective. Most importantly, I've learned to have compassion for myself, especially when I struggle. You see, because being hard on yourself just continues that dreadful cycle. The ongoing work is worth it. Every time I choose to pause instead of push, every time I choose to question that rigid rule instead of following that rigid rule blindly, every time I choose to rest without guilt, those are the victories. They might be small ones maybe, but they all add up. And it's essentially creating a life that feels sustainable, a life where work, whether I'm working for somebody else or I'm working for myself, is actually part of my identity. But it's not all of it. And when I hear those early whispers of burnout now, that cynicism, that exhaustion, that emptiness, I choose to listen to my inner self. See, my body and my mind are not my enemy. They're simply just trying to protect me. And finally, after years of fighting them, I'm learning to work with them instead. Now, you see, burnout is not a badge of honour. It's not evidence of your dedication or your work ethic. It's a signal that something is simply misaligned. For me, that misalignment was between my rigid beliefs about productivity and worth and my actual human needs for rest, for flexibility, and for meaning. Breaking out of burnout required more than better habits. It's about questioning those belief systems that drove those habits in the first place. It required therapy, a personal honesty, and a willingness to embrace what I describe as cautious openness. That's being cautiously open-minded, even when the rigidity felt like the safety. If you're in the middle of a burnout right now, or you're recovering from it, or if you're worried that you're heading towards it, please know this: it's not your fault, but it is your responsibility to do something about it. You can't change it just by working harder on self-care. It takes a deeper look. We have to question the stories we're telling ourselves about who we think we need to be. Yeah, I know that's uncomfortable, isn't it? And it is uncertain. It does require some help. The alternative is staying in a cycle that's just going to continue breaking you down until eventually you realize you have no choice but to change. You deserve a life that is sustainable. You deserve to have rest without the need to earn it. You deserve the right to question every rigid rule, especially when it tells you otherwise. Thanks for listening to this personal testimony. If it resonates with you, I'd love to hear from you. If you're struggling, I suggest please reach out to a therapist. It might not be the first therapist, it might be the second or the third, but keep trying. Eventually you'll find somebody that clicks with you. And that therapist could simply just be a friend or a family member. Remember this: you don't have to struggle alone. So until next time, be kind to yourself. You're doing better than you think.